Professor Aviram is an author and co-chair of the Hastings Institute for Criminal Justice. Here to give a speech on the death penalty, Professor Hadar Aviram.
Good afternoon, folks. The plan for today is to present to you a financial argument on behalf of death penalty abolition. You may be confronted with the need to vote on this in 2014, so this is information that I hope will come in handy and useful. We currently have in California 730 people on death row. Since the reinstatement of the death penalty in California, we have executed 13 people and 85 people died of natural causes. The death penalty, you have to conclude, is an expensive version of life without parole, with lengthy and costly litigation, with or without an execution at the end, more frequently without. And the Legislative Analyst's Office estimates that if we get rid of the death penalty, we're going to be saving $130 million annually. Here's why, and I'm going to break this down into 4 parts. The expense of death penalty trials, the expense of the appellate process, the expense of keeping people in state corrections, and the impact of whatever we do on the murder rates. So let's talk about death penalty trials. We have now in California a separate trial phase for death penalty cases that costs an additional chunk of money. Picking jurors for capital trials costs more money and is longer because you have to make sure not only that the jurors are not biased, but also that they are death qualified. That is, they don't have a principled objection to the death penalty. Each person who is on trial for capital punishment gets two free attorneys, and the stakes of the trial are much higher, and therefore the trial tends to get longer and there tend to be more objections. Also, for the most part, capital defendants are detained during until the end of the trial. They do time in county jail, and therefore county jail beds stay occupied for longer because the trials typically take longer. Second point is the appellate process. Because the stakes are higher and because we're talking about life or death here, there are a lot more appeals and a lot more habeas processes when it pertains to capital punishment defendants. Many of these tend out to be frivolous, but they're still very, very expensive. Again, as a death penalty inmate, as a capital inmate in California, you get 2 attorneys for free, which the state funds for you. And as an aside, which is interesting, this is one of the reasons why in 2012 death row inmates didn't want Prop 34 of death penalty abolition to pass, because then they would lose all of this free litigation help that they get otherwise, and they know that the odds of them being executed are very low anyway. Third point is the cost of corrections. Since people are doing life anyway, both on death row or in general population doing life without parole, the expense of taking care of the person should be about the same. Except it's not. It's much more costly to hold somebody on death row just because the facility requires a lot more security. It is more difficult to maintain. The facility itself is very old and dilapidated. It constantly requires care and maintenance on a pretty regular basis. Also, the fact that people are on death row under pretty heightened security conditions means that funding people's health care costs more money. Just providing the health care in itself is more of a hassle and is more expensive. As an aside, we're kind of married to San Quentin in California because death row is there. But if death row were removed and we could think of other sites, it's important to keep in mind that San Quentin is a very expensive piece of real estate on the shore in North Bay that we could make a lot of money on if we moved the remainder of prison somewhere else. Fourth point, what's going to happen to the murder rate? One of the concerns that people have is that if we get rid of the death penalty, murder rates are going to go up. There is no empirical evidence backing this up whatsoever. There are pretty much 5 people left in the academic world doing work on this, and they all bitch at each other in conferences, and there really is no consensus or any sort of solid proof that the death penalty actually deters murders. I'm going to throw in something else that's coming up very often when I talk about the financial issues. And that is, if we want to save money, why not just make the death penalty more quick and more swift? And then it's going to be tough and cheap, and we won't have to abolish the death penalty. There is a proposition that people are trying to push for the 2014 elections that would streamline and largely eliminate the opportunities that death row inmates have to appeal in the California process. But that is going to raise a lot of other problems, such as constitutional concerns for people's rights if they don't get post-conviction remedies, concerns about innocence and the fact that if there's no appeals, we may be putting even more innocent people on death row than we do now, and something that people don't know a lot about, which is botched executions. 3% of all the executions that we have in America, and California is no different, are botched executions. This does not work in a technically flawless way, and there are a lot of problems involved in its administration that are not going to be fixed if we move to a tough and cheap model. So to conclude, even for reasons that have nothing to do with human rights concerned, it's time for California to join the free world, and the 18 states that have already abolished the death penalty, 6 of them following the financial crisis and largely for cost reasons. If California joins them with the largest death row in the nation, that may be the critical mass of states that have abolished the death penalty that will help us finally push this boulder away and join the world of industrialized democracies that no longer have the death penalty. Thank you.